No one expected the Luna to be the one left standing alone. The royal moon arena shimmered beneath the silver glow of the full moon, its white marble floor reflecting the sacred light said to be the moon goddess's blessing. Thousands of wolves filled the towering seats. Alpha kings from neighboring kingdoms stood shoulder to shoulder with elders, nobles, and warriors, all gathered to witness the annual moon blessing, the ceremony where the Alpha King and his Luna renewed the bond that united not only their hearts, but the future of the kingdom itself. At the center of it all stood Alpha King Riker Blackmore and Luna Seraphina Veilcrest. Seraphina folded her trembling hands before her, hoping no one noticed. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, telling herself that perhaps tonight would feel different. Perhaps tonight, when they stood before the moon goddess once again, Riker would finally look at her the way he once had. Instead, his attention wandered somewhere beyond her shoulder. She swallowed the familiar ache. It wasn't hatred that hurt. It was being forgotten, while standing beside the man who had once promised she would never stand alone. The high priest lifted the sacred silver chalice. "May the moon goddess." A sudden cry shattered the silence. Lady Vivian Ashcroft collapsed onto the marble floor. Gasps rippled through the arena as nobles rushed backward. The royal physician pushed through the crowd, dropping to his knees beside her, while attendants tried to shield her from the growing circle of frightened whispers. Seconds stretched like hours. Then the physician slowly rose. His voice echoed through the arena. "Lady Vivian is carrying the Alpha King's child." Silence. Then came the whispers. They spread like wildfire through the crowd. Impossible. When? Did the Luna know? Every eye turned toward Riker. The elders waited for him to deny it, to step toward his wife, to protect the Luna standing only a few feet away. Instead, Riker walked past Seraphina without saying a word. He knelt beside Vivian, removed his royal cloak, wrapped it carefully around the trembling woman. Then he faced the crowd. "My first responsibility," he said steadily, "is protecting the mother of my child." The words struck harder than any blade. Seraphina didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't plead. She simply watched the man she had loved choose another woman before the entire kingdom. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed unwilling to move. The oldest priest lowered his eyes. He had seen wars. He had buried kings. But he had never feared silence as much as he feared the silence surrounding Luna Seraphina now. Because some hearts did not break with screams. Some broke so quietly that by the time anyone noticed, they were already beyond saving. Seraphina drew one slow breath. Then, without a single word, she turned away from the crowd and walked toward the sacred moon altar. Confused murmurs followed her. Most believed the Luna intended to bless the unborn child. Only the oldest priest understood the truth. His face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "Please, not this." If you've ever watched someone choose someone else while expecting you to stay silent, then you already know why Seraphina's next step would change the kingdom forever. And what she was about to do had not been witnessed for centuries. The entire arena watched as Seraphina climbed the 3 white marble steps leading to the moon altar. Each footstep echoed through the sacred silence. No one dared breathe. The high priest hurried toward her, his ceremonial robes brushing across the polished stone. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, lowering his voice. "The blessing has not yet been completed." Seraphina turned to him with a smile so gentle it made his heart sink. "It never will be." Slowly, she reached for the silver Luna bracelet wrapped around her wrist. The bracelet had been fastened there on her wedding day, symbolizing the sacred partnership between Luna and Alpha King. Every queen before her had treasured it until death. With steady fingers, she unclasped it. The faint click echoed louder than thunder. A wave of unease swept through the elders. She placed the bracelet upon the moon altar. Then she slipped off the ceremonial ring Riker had given her, beneath the moon goddess's blessing years ago. Finally, She removed the royal cloak embroidered with the Blackmore crest and folded it neatly beside the bracelet. She left every symbol of the throne behind. Only Seraphina remained. Riker finally rose from Vivian's side. His brows tightened. Seraphina. She looked at him for the first time since he had walked past her. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness, only exhaustion. "You've made your choice," she said softly. "Now allow me to make mine." A chill settled over the arena. The high priest stepped between them. "Your Majesty, think carefully. The ritual you are considering has not been performed in generations." "I have thought carefully," Seraphina replied. "Long before tonight." Riker took a step toward her. "We'll discuss this privately." She slowly shook her head. "You chose publicly, so I will answer publicly." Those words struck the crowd harder than any roar. Thousands of wolves lowered their eyes. Because she wasn't humiliating him, she was simply refusing to hide her own humiliation. Seraphina faced the glowing altar. She lifted both hands toward the moon. Then, in the ancient tongue nearly forgotten by time, she spoke the sacred vow. "I willingly sever the sacred mate bond." For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then silver light exploded from the altar. The moon arena trembled. Ancient symbols ignited beneath their feet. A sharp, unbearable pain tore through Seraphina's chest. Across the altar, Riker staggered backward, clutching his own heart. His eyes widened in disbelief. "No." The glowing mark around his wrist began fading. He reached instinctively toward Seraphina. "Stop." But she never moved. She simply endured the pain with silent dignity. The final strand of their bond shattered like crystal beneath moonlight. The glowing marks disappeared from both of their wrists. The moon goddess had accepted the severing. For the first time in living memory, an Alpha King stood before the kingdoms without a Luna. The silence that followed was unlike anything the arena had ever known. Even Vivian stared in stunned disbelief. The high priest slowly fell to one knee. His voice barely carried above a whisper. "You have no idea what you've just awakened." Behind him, the gathered rulers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer a family scandal. It was the beginning of a political storm that could shake every kingdom bound to the moon throne. That night, the palace had never felt so large. The celebration planned for the moon blessing had been quietly dismissed. Musicians packed away their instruments without playing a single note. Servants whispered behind closed doors, afraid even the walls might carry their voices to the king. Seraphina walked through the Luna Wing alone. For years, these halls had been called her home. Tonight, they felt like a place she had merely borrowed. She stepped into her chambers and closed the door gently behind her. The silence wrapped around her like an old friend. No tears came. She had cried enough over the years, alone, where no one could hear her. Tonight, there was only peace. She opened a small travel bag and began packing with slow, careful hands. Not the silk gowns woven with silver thread, not the jeweled crowns resting beneath glass, not the necklaces gifted by foreign rulers. One by one, she left them exactly where they belonged. Instead, she folded 3 simple dresses she had owned before becoming Luna. She reached for a worn leather journal, its corners softened by time. Her mother's journal, the only inheritance she had ever treasured. Beside it, she placed a small pouch of dried healing herbs. Her mother had taught her that every plant carried a purpose, if someone cared enough to learn it. Finally, she wrapped a faded blue scarf around them both. Riker had never noticed she still kept it. It had belonged to her father. She smiled faintly. Some memories didn't glitter. They simply endured. Her eyes wandered across the room. The wedding portrait hung above the fireplace. In the painting, Riker looked at her as though she were the only person beneath the moon. She wondered when that look had disappeared, or whether she had only imagined it had ever existed. Quietly, she turned the portrait to face the wall. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. Then she crossed to the writing desk. A single sheet of parchment waited. She dipped her quill into ink. She did not write about Vivian. She did not accuse. She did not beg. Instead, she wrote the only truth that mattered. You did not lose your mate today. You lost her the day you stopped seeing the woman standing beside you. Tonight, you merely witnessed the consequence. She folded the letter neatly and placed it where Riker would find it. Outside her chamber, several maids stood waiting. Their eyes glistened. One young servant stepped forward. "My Luna, may I carry your bag?" Serafina smiled and gently shook her head. "No, you've carried enough for me already." The girl's lips trembled before she bowed deeply. One after another, every servant in the corridor lowered themselves in silent respect. Not because she was their queen, because she had always treated them as people. Before dawn, Serafina walked through the palace gates, wearing an ordinary cloak. The guards recognized her instantly. Neither of them moved. Instead, they placed clenched fists over their hearts, a farewell no law could forbid. She disappeared into the morning mist without looking back. Hours later, Riker entered the empty Luna wing. He expected anger, perhaps broken furniture, perhaps accusations. Instead, he found perfect order. Everything remained, except her. His gaze landed on the folded letter. As he finished reading, the paper slipped from his trembling fingers. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, fear settled into his heart. He summoned every tracker in the kingdom before the sun reached its highest point. Find my Luna. The wolves searched forests, roads, mountain passes, river crossings. Days turned into weeks, but there was no scent, no footprints, no witness. It was as though the moon herself had hidden Serafina from the man who had realized too late that she was already gone. The palace tried to move on. It had no choice. Within weeks, the whispers surrounding the broken mate bond were buried beneath new announcements. Royal banners were raised once more. Musicians returned to the grand halls, and the court celebrated the birth of Lady Vivian Ashcroft's son. The kingdom finally had a prince, or so everyone believed. Riker stood beside the cradle in the royal nursery, watching the tiny infant sleep. The child's fingers curled around his thumb, innocent of the storm that had begun before he had even drawn his first breath. Vivian smiled with quiet satisfaction. "You have an heir now." Riker nodded, but the words brought him little comfort. For reasons he couldn't explain, the nursery felt strangely empty. His eyes kept drifting toward the doorway, as though some part of him still expected Serafina to walk in with that calm smile she wore even on difficult days. She never did. 3 days later, an urgent meeting of the Elder Council was called. Every council seat was filled. The High Priest stood beside the oldest royal archivist, an elderly scholar whose hands trembled as he carried a weathered bundle of ancient scrolls. "I believe," the archivist said carefully, "we have uncovered something that should never have been forgotten." The room fell silent. He unrolled the oldest scroll onto the council table. Its faded silver ink shimmered beneath the candlelight. The First Moon Charter. Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. No one had seen the document in generations. The archivist adjusted his spectacles before reading aloud. "The sacred throne shall pass only to an heir, born of a moon-blessed Alpha, and his bonded Luna, whose union remains recognized by the moon goddess." He stopped. No one spoke. Then he continued. "If the sacred bond is willingly severed, every royal privilege flowing from that bond shall also be severed." The meaning settled over the room like ice. Vivian's son could inherit Riker's blood. He could bear the Blackmore name, but he could never inherit the moon throne. The High Priest slowly closed his eyes. The moon goddess no longer recognizes the royal union. One elder slammed his fist onto the table. Why were these laws hidden? The archivist lowered his head. They were never abolished. They were simply forgotten. Outside the council chamber, rumors spread faster than wildfire. Neighboring kingdoms began questioning the stability of Blackmore's throne. Some delayed trade agreements. Others quietly strengthened their borders. Predators always sensed weakness. Inside the chamber, Riker remained motionless. For weeks, he had believed his greatest loss was personal. Now he understood it had become political. His choices had not only shattered a marriage, they had endangered generations yet unborn. He remembered Seraphina standing alone before the moon altar. She had never threatened him, never cursed him. She had simply reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, she had taken the kingdom's future with her. The weight of that realization stole the breath from his lungs. At last, the oldest elder rose from his chair. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. There is only one living woman still blessed by the moon goddess. Every pair of eyes turned instinctively toward the empty Luna seat that had remained untouched since the ceremony. No one needed to speak her name. They all knew. Somewhere beyond the kingdom's borders, the only woman capable of restoring the future of the moon throne had chosen a life without it. And for the first time in his reign, Alpha King Riker Blackmore understood that some mistakes could not be undone by power, wealth, or command. They could only be lived with. 5 years changed a kingdom. 5 years changed a king. And 5 years transformed the woman everyone believed had disappeared. The Blackmore kingdom was no longer the prosperous land it had once been. Rain had become a rare blessing. Rivers shrank into narrow streams. Fields cracked beneath the relentless sun, and harvests failed one after another. Families abandoned their farms in search of food, while children waited outside the royal granaries, hoping there would still be enough when their turn came. Riker rode through village after village without his royal escort. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, not the polished reports delivered by frightened ministers. An old farmer bowed as the king approached. "Your Majesty," he said, "if you truly wish to save your people, go east." Riker frowned. "Why east?" "They say there is a valley where the rivers have never dried." Another villager nodded eagerly. "No child goes hungry there. They heal the sick. They share their harvest. They ask for nothing in return." "And who rules this valley?" Riker asked. The villagers exchanged warm smiles. "No queen, no noble, only the moon healer." The title tugged at a memory he had spent years trying to bury. Without another word, Riker turned his horse toward the eastern mountains. After 2 days of travel, the dry landscape slowly gave way to green hills. Crystal-clear streams wound through thriving fields. Fruit trees bent beneath the weight of their harvest, and wildflowers covered the paths where butterflies drifted lazily in the afternoon breeze. It felt like stepping into another world. Children laughed as they carried baskets of herbs between neat garden beds. Elderly women taught young mothers how to prepare healing salves. No guards patrolled the roads. No one seemed afraid. Then he saw her. Seraphina stood barefoot in the soft earth, her simple linen dress dusted with soil, as she knelt beside a group of children planting medicinal herbs. She looked up as one little boy proudly held out a tiny green sprout. Instead of correcting him, she smiled. "Every strong forest begins with one small seed." The children laughed. So did she. Riker realized with a painful certainty that he had almost forgotten the sound. She looked healthier than she ever had inside the palace. The constant sadness that had once hidden behind her gentle smile was gone. Peace had softened every line of her face. For several moments, he simply watched. She had built a life that no throne had ever given her. When the children finally ran off toward the river, Seraphina turned and noticed him standing beneath an old willow tree. Neither of them spoke at first. The breeze carried the scent of lavender between them. At last, Riker stepped forward. "I've come to ask you to return." Seraphina studied him quietly. The proud young king she had once known was gone. In his place stood a weary man, carrying years of regret. She smiled, not with longing, but with kindness. "I already have everything I once hoped the palace would become." Her words settled over him with quiet finality. Before he could answer, a little girl ran to Seraphina and slipped her tiny hand into hers. She looked up at Riker with innocent curiosity. "Mister, why did you make our teacher cry all those years ago?" For the first time in his life, Alpha King Riker Blackmore had no answer. The little girl's question followed Riker all night. He stayed in the valley until sunset, not because he expected Seraphina to change her mind, but because he couldn't bring himself to leave. He watched the way people greeted her. Not with fear, not with rehearsed praise, with affection. An elderly man brought her fresh bread simply because he had baked too much. A young mother asked for advice when her son developed a fever. Children tugged at her sleeves, eager to show her the herbs they had learned to identify. She gave each person the same quiet attention, the same patience, the same kindness she had once offered inside the palace. Only now, someone noticed. As dusk settled over the valley, Riker found her watering a row of medicinal plants. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. Seraphina continued pouring water at the roots before answering. "Good." The single word carried no anger, only honesty. He lowered his eyes. "I came because my kingdom is suffering." "And why is it suffering?" she asked gently. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Years ago, he would have blamed the drought, the nobles, the neighboring kingdoms. Now, he knew better. "Because I ruled from the throne," he admitted quietly, "instead of walking among my people." For the first time that day, Seraphina looked directly at him. There was no triumph in her expression. Only hope that he had finally begun asking the right questions. "If you truly regret what happened," she said, "don't spend the rest of your life chasing the woman who left." She stepped closer. "Go home. Feed your people before you feed your pride. Listen before you command. Protect before you expect loyalty. And never ask another woman to carry the weight of a crown alone." Every word settled into his heart more deeply than any royal decree. The following morning, Riker rode back to the capital without asking her to return again. For the first time, he respected her answer. The changes began immediately. Royal granaries that had remained locked for years were opened to every village without payment. Corrupt nobles who had hoarded grain during the famine were stripped of their titles and ordered to repay what they had stolen. Royal tax collectors were dismissed from the poorest regions until the harvest recovered. Riker traveled constantly, eating beside farmers, speaking with widows, and listening to complaints that former kings had ignored. When advisors questioned his decisions, he answered with calm certainty. "A kingdom does not exist to feed its ruler. A ruler exists to feed the kingdom." Months later, a new set of royal laws was announced. No Luna could ever again be publicly humiliated during a sacred ceremony. No Alpha could replace a bonded Luna for political convenience, while still claiming the moon goddess's blessing. Every Luna would have legal authority over matters of healing, education, and the welfare of children throughout the kingdom. Some nobles protested fiercely. Others accused Riker of weakening the authority of Alpha Kings. He listened to every objection, then signed the laws anyway. Whenever the court praised his reforms, he shook his head. "They are not my wisdom," he said quietly. "They are lessons I learned too late." Across the throne room, Vivian watched in silence. The ambitious king she had fought so hard to possess was gone. In his place stood a man finally becoming worthy of respect. The cruelest truth settled over her heart. He had become the husband Seraphina had once prayed for, only after Seraphina no longer needed him. The kingdom healed one season at a time. The rivers returned first, then the fields, then the laughter. What had once seemed impossible slowly became ordinary again. Children no longer stood in endless lines outside the royal granaries. Villages that had been abandoned echoed with life once more. Markets reopened, merchants returned, and the scent of fresh bread drifted through streets that had once smelled only of dust. Whenever people praised the king for the recovery, Riker accepted neither applause nor celebration. He knew too well that rebuilding a kingdom was easier than rebuilding the trust he had broken. Still, every law he signed carried the lesson Seraphina had taught him. Power was not measured by obedience. It was measured by the people who felt safe because of it. One autumn morning, wearing nothing more than a travel cloak, Riker quietly rode back to the Eastern Valley. He came without guards, without royal banners, without expectations. He simply wanted to see whether the peace he had witnessed years before had truly lasted. It had. The valley had grown into something even greater. Small cottages lined the hillsides, surrounded by gardens overflowing with herbs and fruit trees. A healing house stood near the river, where apprentices carefully learned remedies from experienced healers. Children ran freely between the fields, stopping only to greet travelers with cheerful smiles. No one bowed to Serafina. They embraced her. They laughed with her. They trusted her. Riker watched from beneath the shade of an old oak tree, as she knelt beside a frightened young wolf whose arm had been injured while climbing a fence. The boy tried to hide his tears. Serafina smiled softly. "You don't have to be brave every moment." She cleaned the wound with practiced hands. "Even strong people deserve kindness." The child nodded, his shoulders relaxing. Riker lowered his eyes. Years ago, she had offered him that same kindness. He had mistaken it for something that would always be there. When the boy ran off to rejoin his friends, Serafina noticed the familiar traveler standing beneath the tree. She walked toward him, carrying a small basket filled with lavender and mint. "You've become difficult to surprise," she said with a gentle smile. "I wasn't trying to surprise you," Riker replied. "I only wanted to see how your home was growing." She glanced across the valley. "It was never mine alone. The people built it together." He followed her gaze. There were no grand palaces, no jeweled crowns, no throne. Yet somehow, this place felt richer than the royal capital. "I used to believe," Riker admitted quietly, "that I could give people everything by ruling well." Serafina looked at him. "And now? I've learned that sometimes people need to be seen before they need to be led." A warm silence settled between them. Neither reached for the past. Neither spoke of the mate bond. Some memories no longer needed words. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, a messenger on horseback arrived, carrying the royal crest. He dismounted and bowed. "Your Majesty, the harvest festival is 3 weeks away. The council wishes to honor the woman whose farming methods and healing knowledge saved the kingdom." He turned respectfully toward Serafina. "They ask that you attend as our most honored guest. Not as Luna, not as queen, but as herself." Serafina read the invitation carefully before folding it closed. After a thoughtful pause, she smiled. "I'll come." Far away in the capital, preparations for the greatest harvest festival in generations had already begun. No one knew that, before the celebration ended, an old silver bracelet would remind the entire kingdom that some mistakes should never be forgotten. The harvest festival arrived beneath clear autumn skies. For the first time in many years, the capital celebrated without fear of famine. Market stalls overflowed with grain, fresh fruit, and fragrant herbs. Children danced through the streets wearing flower crowns, while musicians filled the city with songs that had nearly been forgotten during the years of hardship. Yet the greatest anticipation had nothing to do with the harvest. It was for the woman returning to the palace, not as Luna, but as the guest who had helped save a kingdom. When Serafina entered the Royal Moon Arena, the crowd rose to its feet. There were no whispers this time, only applause. She wore a simple ivory gown trimmed with embroidered vines, the same modest style she had favored in the valley. She carried no jewels, no crown, and no symbol of rank. She no longer needed them. The respect in the arena had already crowned her. Riker stood upon the royal platform, watching quietly as she took her place among the honored guests, instead of beside the throne. Years ago, that sight would have broken him. Today, he understood it. The high priest stepped forward. "Today," he announced, "we celebrate not only the harvest of our fields, but the harvest of wisdom earned through sacrifice." The crowd applauded again. Then Riker raised one hand. The arena slowly fell silent. A royal attendant approached, carrying a small velvet box. Riker accepted it with both hands. When he opened the lid, a familiar silver bracelet rested inside. The Luna bracelet. The very one Serafina had placed upon the moon altar the night she severed their bond. A murmur swept through the crowd. Many believed they knew what was coming. Several elders exchanged hopeful smiles. Even Vivian lowered her eyes, expecting the king to ask for one impossible chance. Riker looked toward Seraphina. Their eyes met across the arena. There was affection. There was gratitude. There was sorrow, but there was no expectation. He slowly closed the box. Then, instead of walking toward Seraphina, he turned toward the newly completed Royal History Hall standing beside the arena. Every eye followed him. He opened the glass display prepared at its center. With careful hands, he placed the silver bracelet inside. The quiet click echoed through the hall. "This," Riker said, his voice steady, "will never again belong to one person. It belongs to history." He faced the crowd. "The greatest mistake of my reign was believing that loyalty could survive without respect. I mistook silence for acceptance. I mistook duty for love. And I believed a crown could replace partnership." His gaze rested briefly on Seraphina. "I was wrong. No future Alpha should ever forget that." He nodded to the royal mason waiting nearby. The craftsman uncovered a polished stone beneath the display. Freshly carved into its surface were the king's own words. "The day I chose pride over partnership, I stopped deserving both." The arena remained silent, not because people pitied their king, but because they recognized the cost of the lesson. Seraphina smiled softly, not at the bracelet, not at the apology, but at the man who had finally stopped trying to erase his mistake and instead chose to learn from it. As the ceremony ended, a small boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed toward the glass case. "Mother," he whispered, "why would a bracelet be kept like a treasure?" His mother looked at the inscription before answering, "So that when you grow up, you'll never make the same mistake." Years passed. The silver bracelet never gathered dust. Every future Alpha who stood before the moon throne was required to visit the Royal History Hall before the coronation. There, in the center of the great chamber, rested a simple Luna bracelet beneath crystal glass. No guards stood beside it. None were needed. Its story protected the kingdom better than any sword ever could. Young princes would pause before the display, reading the inscription carved by King Riker Blackmore. "The day I chose pride over partnership, I stopped deserving both." The words became more than history. They became law, written upon the hearts of future rulers. No bonded Luna could ever again be publicly replaced. No Alpha could hide betrayal behind tradition or political convenience. The moon throne had learned that strength without honor was nothing more than power waiting to collapse. As for Riker, he never attempted to reclaim what he had lost. He never asked the moon goddess to restore the mate bond. He understood that some gifts, once broken, were never meant to be repaired. Instead, he devoted the rest of his reign to becoming the kind of king he should have been from the beginning. He traveled constantly. He listened more than he spoke. He measured success not by the wealth inside the palace, but by the empty beds in the kingdom's hospitals and the full tables inside its homes. Whenever anyone praised his wisdom, he always answered the same way. "I learned it from the woman I failed." Far to the east, Seraphina's valley flourished beyond anything she had imagined. The small healing garden became an academy, where students arrived from every corner of the continent to study medicine, farming, and the quiet art of serving others before serving themselves. Children who had once arrived hungry grew into healers, teachers, and village leaders. The streams remained clear. The fields remained green. Hope had taken root there, and each generation protected it as carefully as the first. Travelers often asked Seraphina whether she regretted leaving the palace. She would simply smile. "The hardest road I ever walked," she would say, "was the one that led me back to myself." She never spoke bitterly of Riker. There was nothing left to forgive. Time had already carried away the anger, leaving only gratitude for the lesson hidden inside the pain. Neither of them married again, not because they were trapped by the past, but because their lives had found different purposes. One rebuilt a kingdom, the other transformed countless lives. Their paths never became one again. Yet together, they changed history. Long after both of them were gone, children still visited the Royal History Hall before traveling east to the Valley of the Moon Healer. They would stand before the bracelet, then they would stand among the flourishing fields. Only then did they understand. A kingdom had been saved by a king who learned humility. A continent had been healed by a woman who chose dignity over a crown. And in the end, history remembered neither for the bond they lost, but for the lives they changed after letting it go. If this story touched your heart, remember that the greatest victories are not always won by holding on. Sometimes, they begin the moment you find the courage to walk away with your dignity intact. Share this story with someone who needs that reminder, and join us for the next tale of love, loss, and the strength it takes to become who you were always meant to be.